Good evening, everyone. Please be seated. I say surprise and welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification class here. I hope everyone's had a wonderful week so far. Everyone's dried out a little bit. We've been getting a lot of rain here in Texas. I think it's been spreading pretty much across the Midwest, but it's much appreciated. Great for the land, great for the aquifers, and just nice change of pace in general. As we see everything start to green up as the rain falls and wets the land, now we're going to get into this information falling from the Peaceful Solution and greening up our minds and character so we can be fresh and have it fresh in the forefront of our mind, ready to not only learn the Peaceful Solution but be able to teach it to others, because that's, remember, what this class is. The purpose of this class is to teach teachers how to teach, right? It's not enough to gain all this great knowledge and keep it to yourself. No, we want to share it with others, because as we're going to learn here as we move forward in this lesson, in order for a society to live in peace and safety, everyone in society must be willing to agree with and uphold the principles, the concepts that come from morality, that teach morality, that ensure and guarantee morality. Kind of like when we hear the words human rights. Everybody has human rights, and they have the right to certain things. In fact, the definition of that word right is a moral or legal entitlement. Now think of everything that we've learned concerning morals, and what morals have to do or they relate with. That is the rules. Well, what are rules for? We teach all the way back in the very beginning series of the Peaceful Solution for the young children, ages 5 years old and so, and even younger, that rules are meant to keep us safe. And generally speaking, that's what rules are there for. Now, if people ignore the rules or they don't see the value in the rules, then of course that's when problems arise, those problems in the form of conflicts. And these are some of the things that we're covering in this class, the previous class, and what we're getting ready to get into in the next chapter, hopefully, if we get that far, chapter 5, and how to respond to disrespect. But rights are a moral or legal entitlement, something that you're entitled to have. Now, some people have a sense of entitlement, where it's not a right of theirs, but in their own mind and heart, they think that they have that right? And that's a false entitlement or a false sense of entitlement. So we have to be mindful of that, because rules even govern what you are entitled to, what you have rights to. And that ties right into the lesson that we covered previously and continuously through all of these lessons on ownership, right? Ownership means simply that something belongs to you. It belongs to someone, and you have rights regarding your belongings. And even if those belongings are non-tangible, not something that you see, people have rights or ownership over land. Well, you don't necessarily see those rights, except for maybe something you might see on a deed or a piece of paper. There's also rights for intellectual property, stuff that you might see coming forth in software and in programs or ideas. People can actually patent or have rights concerning their intellectual property, and lawsuits have even been entered into the courts because they felt that someone has stolen their intellectual property or stolen their rights to their own property. So a moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something, or to act in a certain way, to obtain something or act in a certain way. And then, of course, you have the phrase that most of all of us know, which is human rights. And like I said before, there's many organizations that have been started as a result of people wanting to protect and wanting to ensure the rights of their fellow human beings. And these are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. In other words, just because somebody might be guilty of a particular crime, you see a lot of these things come up on the news occasionally. Somebody might had the police called on them because they, stole a Snickers bar or something like that from the store, or they were caught speeding. And next thing you know, we've got a case where there's been a use of deadly force by law enforcement. Well, those basic human rights were not protected, and as a result, someone suffered serious bodily injury, or even worse, they lost their life as a result. So we're going to continue here in this this lesson as we wrap up chapter 4, which is respect and society. And Chris left off with the second bullet point there on page 110 under what I have learned, okay? And this is where we're going to pick up today, because this whole what I have learned section is, as you will find in every chapter of the intermediate unit, you get 7 of these per book, is a summary. It's a recap of everything that was covered in that particular lesson. Now, as a teacher, of course, you can draw in and cover and add things to expound upon the points in the what I have learned section, because you also would have expounded upon the points that were covered in the lesson as well. So we tend to know how the human mind is, for the most part. If something's not continuously right in front of us, it can kind of start to slip away because of the everyday affairs and the things that we're dealing with. It can be easy to that stuff kind of gets pressed down a little bit further and further. Not that it's gone, but sometimes you need something to kind of spark your mind back up and remember, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. We were talking about culture and disrespect and so forth. So we're going to pick up on bullet point number 3 there. Chris covered the number 1 and 2, which is society consists of a community or a large group of people who work together for a common purpose. That was the first point. The second one was culture includes a shared set of attitudes, values, goals, and practices that distinguish one group of people from another. And what we're picking up on tonight is point number 3. And it says, although the concept of disrespect can vary. Okay, the concept of disrespect can vary. Remember, a concept is simply, an idea, and not that it's a kind of out there, theoretical type thing. No, it's an idea that also is put into a concrete substance that we can learn and that we can practice, right? So the idea or the concept of disrespect can vary from culture to culture. Now this is a concept because it's not necessarily something that you can necessarily see, or that might be set in stone, or there might not even be written rules regarding it, right? That you not necessarily go to a different country or engage with a different culture, and they have these are the things that are considered disrespectful in this country. These are the things that are considered respectful in this environment or in this culture or this society and so forth. But they're there. They exist, right? And sometimes you find out by making a mistake and doing things that you're not supposed to do, or doing things that are considered disrespectful, and somebody might politely remind you or guide you and point certain things out to you and say, no, here in this country we don't do that. We don't shake with this hand, or we don't do certain things, and you learn from that experience. But although the concept of disrespect can vary from one culture to the next, some behaviors are universally accepted. Now, if we go back a little bit here to pages 88 through 89, we can see some of these variations because we covered those in the previous lessons there. And just look at the 3. Just look at the 3 things that might vary from one culture to the next on pages 88 through 89 of your respect unit. We talk about other categories used to distinguish one culture from another. Now, these are distinguishing categories, but some of them, can display respect, and some of the actions can also display disrespect. And for the most part, people, generally speaking, and I'll use that, a generalized statement, they don't desire to disrespect themselves or disrespect others with their behavior. But because they're not educated, because they don't know, the difference between what's right and wrong, kind of in depth in seeing the the consequences that will follow their actions. Maybe not immediately, but could be, like we covered in the previous couple classes, could be months down the road, could be years down the road, could be decades down the road, as we're going to see as we move forward here. They make choices that bring harm to themselves, others, and the environment. And this is why education is so important, because the more you educate another and the more a person is educated and they accept that education, the more powerful they become in their ability to actually bring a peaceful environment, to actually make decisions that are beneficial to themselves and others, both right now and in the future. Because remember what we covered the last time I had the opportunity to speak to you, was we talked about cause and effect. When there's an action, for every action there's a reaction. For everything we do, there's going to be an effect or a consequence that follows it. That is, something that occurs as a result of us doing one thing. So in these three categories here that we talked about on pages 88 through 89, we talked about morality, we talked about entertainment, and clothing, and how some cultures, they value modesty. They value chaperoning young men and young women so that they don't get themselves in trouble. Whereas other cultures, dating and hooking up, we talked about before, is a common theme. And people are told to go out and sow your oats, find out, taste of the land, and see what you like and you don't like before you settle down. Well, in the meantime, while they've tasted of the land, or they've experienced everything that's in their environment, they've also taken with them a lot of baggage in the form of little microorganisms that are also called STDs, that are called parasites, they're called, bad joints and things of that nature. Some of it's jail time, or records and things of that nature. So there are consequences to the things we do, and we encourage in the Peaceful Solution for our students to make decisions based on the facts, right? And also think about the consequences of your decisions. Even if you're making a decision that won't bring harm to yourself, others, or the environment, still carefully consider how this decision might affect you, some years down the road, right? Like spending money now compared to spending money later. Okay, buying this, that because it's cheaper compared to buying something that costs a little bit more, and you're going to have it longer, right? Now, that's not a moral or immoral decision, but taking time to consider the consequences or the things that you'll have to deal with in the future. Doing that now could actually save you time and resources way down the road, especially since we're not seeing prices drop significantly in anything that we deal with. Food, clothes, tools, everything is so expensive now, and I foresee that it continues to go up for a period of time anyway. And then we talked about entertainment here, because entertainment in the form of music, art, and sports has always been an important aspect of many cultures. Now, of course, some of the music is very relaxing, it's educational, it's stimulating to the mind. In fact, many studies have been made in regards to how classical music, instrumental classical music, is beneficial in aiding in obtaining and retaining knowledge as people study, not having it blasting, next to your ear on a 12-inch woofer or anything like that, but just subtly, low, played in the background. How songs that promote violence and aggressive behavior, how they can do just the opposite, right? How they can kind of stir up the emotions in the listener, and they kind of take on this aggressive tone, this aggressive nature when they hear that song. They could be driving down the road and then some song come on, and next thing you know, they're kind of leaning back in their chair and their arm comes up on the steering wheel, and they hit the accelerator a little bit harder, going from one red light to the next red light, and they're looking at these are the influences of music, right? And people don't realize how powerful those influences can be until someone points it out to them. Even if they suffer a consequence from it, they might not associate that consequence with that influence, right? This is why education is important, because a lot of us, we wouldn't know things until they were pointed out to us, until they were made clear to us. We can go back and look at what led from step A, step B, step C, and so forth, and led us to where we are now. And of course, there's also clothing, and how some cultures, it would be considered very disrespectful for, men or women to wear things that expose certain parts of their body in their country. Sometimes it's in certain maybe buildings or environments. I know certain restaurants it's considered disrespectful. Certain restaurants have dress codes, right? The men have to wear a button-down shirt and a tie, and women have to wear maybe like a skirt that goes below their knees when they're sitting down. And there's certain dress codes that establishments have in place because they want to maintain a particular reputation, right? They want to have kind of the way people look at when they go to that restaurant. They expect fine dining. They don't want to go there and people are all rowdy and you got the guy in his Hawaiian shirt and not that there's anything wrong with Hawaiian shirts, but they have a standard that they want to uphold, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in certain cultures it can be considered disrespectful to dress in ways that reveal or expose one's body. And then on page 91 there, speaking of the differences in cultures and what can be considered disrespectful, it was talking about the respect bridges the gap between cultures, and that's the heading on that page on 91. And it says, in some instances, something considered respectful in one culture might be considered or might be disrespectful in others. Disrespect, notice here, and it goes back into reiterating what disrespect is: a lack of care, concern, and courteous regard for others or their possessions. For example, did you know that in some cultures, belching loud after you eat is not only respectful, but it's also polite? It tells the cook that you enjoyed the food, while in other cultures, belching aloud, especially in the presence of others, is considered disrespectful, rude, and crude. Okay, so this goes back to us educating ourselves. Remember, we talked about diplomacy and ambassadors of peace, and diplomat will educate themselves to get an idea of how they need to conduct themselves before they go into a certain environment, because there are standards that people do uphold and they value. And if you don't do that, it can be considered rude. Or if you do something that you're not supposed to, it can be considered rude. And people can be highly offended as a result of it. Although there are some differences as to what is considered respectful and polite from one culture to the next, there are universal behaviors that bridge the gap between cultures. All right. So now think about that, because what we talked about here. Let's see here. All right. So they can vary from culture to the next. Some behaviors are universally accepted as disrespectful. Now, if you look back at page 93, some behaviors are universally accepted as disrespectful. We talked about just a few on 88, and 89 there. But if you go to 93 and we look at some of the things that are considered disrespectful, on page 92 at the very top of the page, it says the following is a list of behaviors considered respectful throughout the world. Now, if you look on 93 at the top, it says the following behaviors are considered disrespectful, keeping in that same line of thought. And one of them is physical abuse. Of course, this includes violent and aggressive behavior. Verbal abuse includes cursing, teasing, or putting down, making fun of others. Stealing or damaging someone else's possessions. Ownership is a universal concept. That's what we talked about at the very beginning of class. Ownership is very important. And even as several of the teachers have mentioned, even thieves don't like to be stolen from. They recognize the rights of ownership when it comes to their belongings, but it wasn't so important when it was the other person's, right? There's that sense of entitlement. People have this ideology when they steal from large corporations. They justify in their mind, oh, well, this company, it makes billions of dollars. It brings in billions of dollars a year, or hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They're not going to miss a $20 item or a $100 item, right? It's my rights. No, it's not your rights. It's the right of the person who bought it or the corporation who bought it. And when you go into a store, right, you have the rights to buy things, but those things don't belong to you until you exchange money for it. So there, at that point, at that register, there's an exchange of ownership. It goes from the store to you. Okay? Now you have rights of ownership. And if you leave that store and somebody knocks you over and steals the things out of your cart, you haven't stolen from the store, they've stolen from you. Okay? So then the police get involved and they press charges and they look for the person that stole. So, keep in mind and reiterate this in the minds of your students, because it can be just things as simple as like William covered in one of the classes about just children going in the refrigerator and the cabinet and just snatching out anything that they want, right? Or even just leaving the house and just going wherever they want without informing their parent or guardian or asking permission if they can go here or there. Okay, because the parents do have rights of ownership concerning their children. The parents also have rights of ownership concerning their belongings, the things that they buy to support the household. Sometimes parents might buy things and they have them foods and other items that they want to use at a particular time. Possibly there's a gathering or a meeting, or they want to make a special meal at a certain time of the week. And if the child just goes and snatches that because they're hungry, now when the parent or the guardian goes to get it, where's it at? Anybody seen this? Oh yeah, I ate that the other day. Well, who gave you permission to eat that? I was just hungry. Okay, well, you should ask, we got some other food there that you could have eaten. My bad. Yeah, my bad. That was a common phrase back in the day, just like having a cow. So we have the next point is there rude, and point number 4, rude or crude behavior. This includes not being dressed appropriately or exposing private body parts in public places. And this was a big problem in schools even. And this is why a lot of schools adopted dress codes because students weren't honoring the code of conduct within the schools, and they would come in the schools and they would wear things that were scantily dressed. The girls would have things hanging out, the guys would have things hanging out, and so forth. And it was a big distraction. It was a huge distraction to the other students. Because what are they doing? Well, there's, Susie over there or Jimmy over here, he's got his big muscle shirt on. And what did you learn in math? Well, I got a lot of things subtracted from me, which was my education for the day, because they were distracted by these things. So schools instituted a dress code to kind of help the students become more focused on their work. And some schools even went as far to not only institute a dress code, but to separate the young men and the young women. And they even have schools that are all girls schools, and they have schools that are all boys schools to try to help redirect and focus the child's mind on what they're there for. It's not to find a girlfriend. It's not to find a boyfriend, right? It's not to find out what's going to be taking place at the next big party on the weekend. No, it's to get an education. That's what they're going to school for. And now, school, a lot of parents say that, a lot of teachers say, school is nothing but a joke right now. Not that the curricula or the education, the reading, the arithmetic, and the writing and so forth cannot benefit the students, but so much time is spent correcting the students. So much time is spent with distractions and so forth that the only thing people are learning is how to be more disrespectful. So, of course, this is why character education is needed to be a part of the everyday curricula in the schools to help the learning process become more streamlined and, of course, more fulfilling and valuable. And the next point there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is disregarding the position of one in authority. This is another way that disrespect can be taken place or had even universally, right? You can go to another country and you can get pulled over by a law enforcement officer, and then you just disrespect them or don't listen to them or don't comply with the commands that they're giving you. Some people make obscene gestures towards them, or they just speed off where the officers have to give chase. or the state troopers or deputies or whatever the case might be, right? That's disrespecting of the authority. You know, if they're there and they have control or governorship over the roads, wherever they have governorship over, right? You are expected to comply. That's a part of your rights to drive a vehicle on the road. And if you don't, well, then you're disrespecting the authority. And it's not just that officer. It's not just that person. It's also the governing body that gives that officer the authority to do his job or her job, okay? Whether it's the city, the county, the state, or the nation, the federal government. When you disrespect that person, yes, you are disrespecting the person, but you're also disrespecting the entity or organization that they represent, because they're just representatives, right? They're officers, okay? So we need to keep that in mind because I know today it's kind of promoted, and it's promoted to a lot of the young people to not comply, right? Not comply with authority. And sure, it kind of eases into, you know, law enforcement and so forth. But that whole mentality of not complying or not respecting authority, you know, it doesn't seem as valuable until you're the authority trying to get someone to comply with you, right? And then you start to see when the shoe's on the other foot, man, I can't believe that I was actually behaving this way. Sometimes people won't even see that. They just think, just listen to me, respect my authority, you know? You know, and they never kind of get that lesson, of course, until they're taught. But doing these things and disregarding the position of one in authority, it says in every culture there are authority figures and leaders who guide and direct others. Parents, teachers, and government officials are only a few examples of authority figures. And then lastly there, or not lastly, second to last, it says display hand gestures that are considered vulgar. And that's one of the things I just mentioned. Sometimes people will do that. You can, like I said, be driving or riding a bike or walking anywhere, and, you know, someone could display a hand gesture that there's at least one hand gesture that I know that transcends all cultures. I'm not going to show you. But there's at least one that everybody in every culture would know is considered disrespectful, and it's a form of disrespect. It's not a way of saying, hi, you're number one, you know, but it is considered very disrespectful. And some people respond very differently than others do. But when it's done, it shows that you don't respect that person, you don't have value for them, and so forth. And lastly, it says disregarding the rules. Public places have rules that govern behavior and proper conduct. For instance, there are many places such as malls, restaurants, and rules that prohibit smoking, loud music, and shoving while waiting in line. So those are just some of the few things that are considered universally disrespected in point number 2. Now, the next bullet point there, number 4, or check 4, it says rules within a society instruct and guide. Now, remember what we covered rules are. And we covered that over and over and over and over again. And you know what? We're going to continue to cover it over and over and over again till you memorize it. But in the self-control unit on page 4, we talk about how morals, relate to rules. And morals are rules that help us. Now notice what they do. They help us behave in ways that are appropriate. And this is why we kind of, as teachers and educators of the Peaceful Solution, we need to work to place in the minds of our students that rules are beneficial, right? Anything that doesn't bring harm to yourself, others, and the environment, and is set up in the form of a rule, well, accept it. Keep it. Keep it. Even if you don't like it, keep it. Because if it's not bringing harm, it's not doing damage or anything like that, then just follow the rule, okay? But they help us to behave in ways that are appropriate. And if you think about some of the general rules that we have in society, rules of the road, rules of conduct at the workplace, conduct at schools. Yes, there are rules that govern conduct at school. They have a code of conduct. Most schools have a code of conduct. And some of the schools have student handbooks that they'll give to the students, usually in the upper grades, high school, usually high school for sure, but possibly even like intermediate school or junior high. And out in that book, they lay out the rules that are expected for the student to uphold, whether it's clothing, attendance, behavior, and so forth. Behavior and interaction with the school environment, like no chewing gum. I know it's a big rule on school campuses. It's a big rule on school campuses. Sometimes the signs are posted outside the gate, if there's a gate or a fence, or just various places throughout the school grounds. No gum chewing. Definitely no smoking, no vaping. They had to include vaping now, right? But no chewing gum. But then you'll go to schools, and you go to a school campus, and you'll see the ground just dotted with gum. That people have, I can't chew gum inside. Well, there's a trash can right there. No, this is easier. And then they spit on the ground, right? I had the horrid experience one time of being in the school and then moving the desk and realizing the bottom is a lot softer than the top of the desk, only to find out that it was dotted with pieces of gum all underneath the desk. And I was pretty grossed out at that point, but that, that's disrespect. That's a very disrespectful way to treat the belongings of the school. That campus grounds, the doors, the desk, the floors, the walls, they all belong to the school or the city or whoever owns the school, but at that moment they belong to the school. And if you break the rules regarding conduct at the school, then you're out of line. So rules within society instruct and guide. They instruct and guide all people towards respect and consideration for each other. Well, if you look at my slide there under the definition of the word instruct, because we have both of them, instruct and guide. It says to instruct is to direct or command something to do something, especially as an official order. It also means to teach someone a skill or a subject or a skill. Inform someone of a fact or situation. And of course, that's what you're getting here with these classes. You're receiving the facts. You're also receiving the subjects and the skills of how to be a peacemaker. Also, to give knowledge, to teach, train, to provide with authoritative information. And that's one of the things that we teach in the Peaceful Solution in regards to that first character trait of getting the facts, of educated, getting the facts and making sure they're correct. You can say getting the facts and making sure they're from an authoritative source, someone who has the authority to give you this particular information. It's kind of like when I'm dealing with my children and I ask them, well, why did you do this? Or who said you could do this? Oh, well, my sibling or my brother or sister said that I can. I'm like, are they your authority? Because both of you are in trouble, right? You realize that, right? No, they're not the authority, right? Get your facts, get your information from an authoritative source so you can make an informed decision. Of course, 5 or 6-year-olds aren't going to be looking to make informed decisions, but as young adults, 11 through 13, and then up into the high school years, and as adults, we should want to make decisions that are informed and that are in our best interest, not decisions that are impulsive or just kind of, willy-nilly. Well, I'll just deal with the problems as they come up. No, we should want to be informed. We should want to make clear, concise decisions or logical decisions that's going to be in our best interest and also in the interest of others. And then the other word there on the next slide there, guide. So instruct and guide. The definition of that word guide is a person who advises or shows the way to others. And this is what you get as we're training in our ability to teach. That's exactly what we're doing. We're not only giving the knowledge, but we're showing them how to use the knowledge for a beneficial purpose so they can get the benefit of it in their lives when they put it to practice, and they can show others how to do the same thing. A person who advises others, especially in matters of behavior or beliefs. Now remember where we find that word beliefs, right? A part of the definition of beliefs outside of cultures and things of that nature is it helps to make up our character, right? Our character. So if a person believes that they're doing something wrong, and they know that it's not right, then they won't do those things. Or if they believe they should be conducting themselves properly, then they'll avoid the things that are immoral. If they believe that they're right when they're in the wrong, then they'll do the things that are immoral. Okay, but these things come through many, many years of education and showing the person the difference between what's right and wrong. And of course, like I said before, when you think about the word instruct, of course, we're not forcing people to choose morality. We're guiding them in the direction so they can make that decision on their own, because it becomes even more valuable when people see the benefit in practicing peace or practicing morality and have the desire from within to put it into practice. Because like we mentioned before, well, it's not out of fear, it's not out of force. They're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. And that's why we should practice the peaceful solution as well. Back to the definition there, it says, a structure or marking which directs the motion or positioning of something. Now you think about that, I'm sure many of you have heard of the phrase tour guide, right? People will get a tour guide, or they'll just hire a guide. If they go to another country, they'll hire a guide to show them around. Why? Because they don't have GPS? Maps weren't invented? No. They want somebody who knows the right places to go. And they want somebody who knows the right places or the wrong places to avoid. Because there's some places in some areas you do not want to go. And you would not know that unless there was someone to guide you there, to guide you toward the things that are beneficial, to help you to accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish, that are beneficial goals, that are healthy goals, and to avoid the things that will bring harm to you. And that's what a teacher of the peaceful solution does. It helps the student. It guides the student, towards the things that are beneficial and away from immoral practices. The impulsivity is it's there with young people because they don't stop and think about the consequences of their actions. Then it's not a normal thing. A person has to be trained to stop and think and to make a rational decision. They can, but it takes years of training and it takes years of overcoming the emotion that is involved in a lot of the decision making of young people and adults alike. Think about that. Can you put up the next slide there? Does anybody know what that is? It's not tribal markings on a tree.
Property mark.
That's actually we call them trail markers. We call them trail markers, and they have different meanings. They have different colors. They can have different shapes. They can show different directions that you're going into. If you're going towards water, if you're going uphill, downhill, and so forth. And they put, I mentioned this the last time I was teaching class, and I didn't have a picture to show you. But when the first people who go into an area and kind of lay out a trail, they're called trail blazers. All right, not to be confused with the Chevy SUV. All right, but they're called trail blazers. Another synonym for that is like forerunners. Okay, people who kind of laid the path for others to follow. Well, these people do the same thing. They go into an area, a forest, and they would blaze a trail, and they would mark that trail, and they would mark it on both sides of the tree so that you can see it when you're going and when you're coming. And that gives you the direction, that shows you the way that you're wanting to go. If you're wanting to go to the top of the mountain, or if you're wanting to go down by the lake, well, you have to follow the indicator on the tree that tells you which way to go. And of course, that's what the peaceful solution does. It gives us markers so that we can see if we're on the right path or if we're not. Why? Because someone else, the author, Yisrael Hawkins, and 50 other concerned parents and teachers, have blazed the trail for us to achieve peace. Whether it's a mountain you're wanting to climb or a river or a ravine that you're wanting to get to, it's already been blazed. And when people get off the trail, that's when they got to call the, rescue squad or the park ranger or something like that, because they got off the trail, they got themselves in trouble because they did not follow the guidance of another who is an authority in how to accomplish this goal. So keep these things in mind because they're very important. These words aren't just out there, just willy-nilly for you to kind of glance over. But as a teacher, we should be thinking bigger than our students. That's how we kind of stay a step ahead of them to guide them. The next slide there is the next part of the word guide, the second definition of the word guide, it says, now this was a verb. The other one was a noun. That's what a guide is. This is the action of guiding. It says to show or indicate the way to, and it gives a parenthesis there, someone, direct or have an influence on the course of action of someone or something. Now, in this case, we're talking about how rules, right? Rules do this very thing. They have an influence on our course of action, right? If you're doing 75 miles an hour and you come to a sign that says 55 miles an hour is the speed limit, that rule has had an influence on you, and it's going to direct your course of action because you're going to slowly pull your foot off the accelerator or hit cancel on the cruise control or whatever. You know, depending on what you grew up watching, you might stick your foot out so you can slow your vehicle down, you know, but I don't actually think the Flintstones actually existed. But those rules have an influence on our behavior. They do if we value the rules. Because you'll have people who will blow through a 55-mile-an-hour sign. You'll have people who will blow through stop signs, not considering the danger that they're putting themselves and others in when they don't respect the rule. Okay? So just keep that in mind there. The rules within a society instruct and guide all people toward respect and consideration for each other. And yes, when we do keep the rules, we are not only benefiting ourselves, but we're also benefiting and considering others. Next point there, it says, verbal and physical violence, as well as racism and crime, are ways that people are disrespected in society. And on page 94 and 95 of your respect unit there, we see here exploring disrespect in society under that very heading, violence and aggression. On page 94, it says, violence and aggression can exist in two forms, verbal and physical. Did you know that derogatory or negative remarks about someone's skin color, nationality, or physical appearance, as well as threatening to hurt someone, are forms of verbal violence and abuse? And there are laws against that, even when you're dealing with law enforcement, and even if you're not dealing with law enforcement, it could be your neighbor, right? Threats, making verbal threats. I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to do this, or some form of violence, some act of violence. People can actually have charges pressed on them as a result of that, especially the higher an authority a person gets, like threats to the president or threats to law enforcement and so forth, the greater the crime or the sentence or the punishment or the consequence that might be associated with it. That's right, words can be violent. Whoever said words couldn't hurt was wrong. Words do hurt and can result in lifelong emotional scars. And then you see there at the next paragraph, it says to use physical force against someone with either a fist, so we talked about verbal, now this is physical, with either a fist, a kick, or a weapon is one of the worst and most dangerous forms of disrespect. Violence and aggression contribute to our high crime rate and can range from pushing someone in the hallway at school to rape, assault with a deadly weapon, and murder, such as school shootings. And then on page 95 there it says, so we see here what takes place at school. The two most common forms of violence in the home are domestic violence and child abuse. All right, both of these result in terrible consequences to the individual and society. And if you look down a little bit further on the right-hand column there on page 95, it says, crimes in the form of robberies, stabbings, rapes, shootings, and killings are also examples of ways people are disrespected in society. Think about it. Respect is to have care and concern for others and to hold them in high regard. All right, so if anybody intentionally does that or shows that disrespect, they're not holding their neighbor or their fellow human or citizen, whatever you want to call them, with respect or high regard. So these are ways in which disrespect takes place in society. If you look on page 97 there, so we have verbal and physical violence, and also have racism. Racism and its forms, on page 97 in the second paragraph, is disrespect for others because of their nationality or cultural belief is called racism. And it promotes an ideology that there is a difference in the value of human existence and gives a false impression that one group of people is superior to another. Well, where does that false impression come from? Again, it comes from what they've been educated in, whether it comes from the home, whether it comes from just other people in their culture or their environment. It was something that was taught, because generally speaking, from the onset of birth to infancy and toddler, and children they're not racist. They don't really look at people of a different color or different ethnicity and think differently about them. Okay, if they've grown up in an area where there was all white people or all black people or all Chinese people, and they see somebody from a different nationality, they might be inquisitive, like, oh, I've never seen someone that dark, or I've never seen someone that looks like this, or talks like this, or sounds like this. But they don't discriminate, right? It's just interesting because it'd be like anything else that's new that comes in your environment. Wow, I've never seen somebody. I remember seeing back in the day, those, I don't know if you remember, like, I don't know what if it was in the 20s or something like that, when they were kind of perfecting, and all these people had these different ideas of bicycles, and they had this one bicycle that had this really big wheel on it. The front wheel was super, super tall, and the back wheel was like super, super small, and the guy would come riding. I've never seen that because I wasn't around in the 20s, but I thought, man, that would have been an interesting sight to see. Or you see somebody that comes by on one of these 6-foot or 10-foot high, unicycle things, right? It's interesting. You don't go, oh, that thing doesn't have 2 wheels. Oh, that's an evil thing. I'd never want to see that again in my neighborhood. I'm calling the police right now. No, it's just interesting. And that's the way it is with children. But when they're taught that, oh, no, you don't hang around with people of that color, or I don't want to ever see you talking with people of that nationality or that culture, right? They're bad. They're the scum of the earth or whatever. Then it starts to impart an influence in the mind of the child. They might fight against it at first, but over a period of time, they might actually start to believe it. Okay, so we have to be careful, because these are the things that are in society that our young people are educated with, that changes their beliefs and what they value. So it says racism is an unreasonable hatred directed at an individual or an entire group of people, and is expressed in many ways, such as prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. So these are the expressions of racism. Next paragraph, regardless of how it is expressed, racism in our society devalues the life and worth of others. It can lead to violence and aggression, and destroys the trust and respect that must exist between people if there is to be peace, unity, and harmony in society. And we've heard of things called culture wars or race riots and things of that nature, and they're never very pretty. They're never beneficial. So here's the 3 expressions of racism. Prejudice literally means to judge something or someone without first getting and examining all the facts. Uh-oh. What does that tell you about a person who's prejudiced? That they're ignorant. And that's not a derogatory or a disrespectful term to them. It'd be disrespectful to themselves to stay in that condition, but that's all that means. It means they've judged the matter before they've gotten and examined all the facts. Do they really know that these people are they really less? Right? Because someone told them that they're less. Have they talked to them? Have they interacted with them? Have they learned about them or their culture or how they grew up or where they came from, or possibly even what people in their culture or nationality has experienced over the year as a result of these types of things? Okay, so that's prejudice. The other one is stereotype. That means a set image, and it's derived from the process of making metal plates for printing, stereotyping. The plates for printing images onto paper and so forth. Applying this word to people means forming an instant picture of an individual or an entire group of people. Stereotyping results in generalizations about people without recognizing them as unique individuals. And they give some examples there at the very bottom. And the last expression of racism is discrimination. And discrimination means to deny others equal respect, rights, and opportunities based on their color, place of birth, religion, age, gender, and cultural practices. And it's got so much that, the government, at least here in the United States, they've enacted, movements and so forth that promote equal rights, and even so much that employers will, they'll kind of boast about that. We're a EOE, an equal opportunity employer. We don't discriminate, and I believe it's a federal law against discrimination, and on their equal opportunity employment charts that I believe every, corporation and business with so many employees or more are supposed to have. I'm sure you've seen, if you've been in the break room, you see those big laminated charts, and they show, you can't discriminate because of handicap or, sex or religion, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever the case might be, because they're trying to promote just equality in human rights, not denying a person the job because they are of a particular gender. That used to be big, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, right? But again, a lot has changed, right? And people's quest or endeavor to have equal rights, it has changed. If you take away from one area, you leave a void in that area to place something in another, right? Like it was brought out in the class, you take the mothers and the parents out of the homes and put them all in the workplace because they're all chasing after the Joneses or whatever the American dream is. Well, now you leave this empty void, and you leave the children that have to try to fend for themselves. And you have latchkey children, you have, parentless homes and things of that nature, and you don't have the environment that nurtures a healthy family, all right? So we have to be very mindful of those things. But anyway, verbal and physical violence as well as racism and crime are ways that people disrespect others in society. Then the next point there, it says media influence, especially in the form of television, can affect a person's choice to be respectful. On page 103 through 105 of your respect unit, we see there the role of media in society. And William covered this when he was teaching, talking about one of the most significant sources of influence in our society is the media, and it still is. Very powerful, very significant source of influence in society today. It's even more vast than when these books were written, in the early 2000s, because the majority of what we had then was pretty much television, radio, movies, and video games. Well, we still have those, but we have them to an even greater degree and greater accessibility now than it was back then. Imagine carrying your big box television around with you whenever you wanted to watch the news or something like that. First of all, you got to have a source of power, and if you're going to be self-sufficient, then you had to carry a heavy battery, then you had to carry an invert. It would have been pretty much impossible. Now all people have to do is pick up their phone or a tablet or something like that, and they can catch the news. The word media is a general term that refers to various forms of mass communication, all right, and that was covered. And then you look at the third paragraph down, it says, next to the second television there, it says the availability and popularity of television make it one of the most powerful sources of influence in our society. And as teachers now, we can add, the TV, the internet, social media, all these things could be added to this because it's not just the television anymore. In fact, I think people probably spend more time on these things than they do actually at television at home, but they still watch a lot of television. Billions of people own more than one television set, and by the age of 72, the average American would have spent a total of 11 years in front of the television. That is 11 years to be influenced, to allow teachings that will affect your character, whether in a positive or negative way, depending on what you watch, depending on what you value. What you value is what you're going to watch, right? And those values will affect your character, which will in turn affect your behavior, the choices that you make. Influenced by all various programs that are aired. If you calculate that into hours, that's 96,426 hours of television. Now, I did a general calculation of that, of what we have in regards to not just television, because television, actually, if you go and you look up on Statistica, I think it is Statista, I think that's the website. I'll have to find it. It's a website that gives statistics of media. And television actually is still a big portion of it, okay? And then they have the other forms of social media above that. But now the average person right now spends an average of 750 minutes. It's not hours. 750 minutes, I believe is what it said, a day. A day with social media, or media in general. Not social media only, media in general. That equates to approximately 12 and a half hours a day. More than half the day is spent with that. So this number that we had back in 2000, which was 11 years, when you take that and you average it out, and I averaged it from about the age 12 to 72, so about 60 years, that's 31.25 years sitting in front of some type of device that's influencing you. 31.25. 11 years was a lot. 1 year is a lot. If you're being influenced in something that's not beneficial for the development of a positive character, 1 minute is too much, okay? But now we look at the statistics today because of the availability and the vastness, the massness, if you want to call it that. The mass media has become even more mass than it was in the early 2000s. Even more than it was in the early 50s, okay? 31.25 hours, that's a difference of like 20 hours, 20.25 hours from the early 2000s. Well, what we watch on television affects our values and cultural beliefs and can also influence us to adopt the same beliefs and values. And let's go back here. Finish these last 2 points out here on page 110. It says, there are both natural and forced consequences for disrespecting others in society. All right, and remember, like what we covered there, that you can find that on page 107, not all these things are immediate. Some of the delayed consequences we talked about and even involve these risk-taking behaviors that we talked about at the very first chapter of the self-control, of the character unit. That's just one of the things that is affecting young people today. And it's a push. It's a hard push for the young people to go out and engage in promiscuity. Well, some of the delayed consequences of that can range from 1 to 30 years later. With chlamydia being 1+ years, syphilis being 30+ years, that is before you start to experience or recognize the effects of engaging in just one time of risk-taking behavior. HPV, which is the most common STD, 9 of which they have vaccines for, but I guess that would be 191 of which they have nothing for, right? They don't have anything to prevent those things, except for what we've been going over in the Peaceful Solution, which is educating yourself and abstinence. Right? Educating yourself on what these things can bring, waiting to find the proper mate, and then, waiting to join them in marriage and so forth. And then the last point there, it says, for the rewards of respect to become a permanent part of society, each member must be willing to respect others. And of course, you can find that on page 108 there at the very bottom under rewards for respect. It says, keep in mind that it's up to each member of society to choose to develop a positive moral character and to make choices that show respect for themselves and others. This is the only way that respect can become a permanent part of society. And if you look at that last slide there under mutual, because this is when people agree, 2 or more people agree, you find this definition of the word mutual. It says, I think I still have that slide. The slide's up there. It says, number 1, of a feeling or action experienced or done by each of 2 or more parties towards the other parties. And that's what mutual is. Held in common by 2 or more parties. So in other words, 2 or more people, in this case a society, are agreeing to act or conduct themselves in ways that show respect. And when we do that, of course, this can become a permanent part of society. Lastly, there at the bottom of the page, it says, think about it. We can make a difference and change the world around us. Peace can be found when we respect others. But of course, and this is something you have to reiterate to your students, and what we're getting ready to get into in chapter 5, it helps them to deal with the difficulties of them working really, really hard to put these things into practice. Because you will have students who really value what they've learned in the peaceful solution. Some might kind of slough it off. Yeah, I'm just here because my mom made me come, or it's just a part, I need an extra credit or whatever. But you will have students that value this, and they'll really work hard to put these things into practice in their everyday interaction with others. But then they're going to encounter the people who don't value it, or who have not been taught to practice the peaceful solution. And the next chapter is going to prepare them for how to deal with that. But the main thing that they have to keep in mind is to maintain their positive character. Remember what C is for, right? Not Chevrolet. C is for consistency, which means they must be consistent in upholding positive moral values irregardless of what's taking place in their environment. So we're going to stop right there, and that concludes chapter 4. And what I have learned we'll pick up in chapter 5 next class, which is going to be Sunday the 28th, right here. Join us at 5:30 Central Standard Time, p.m. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you for attending this class. Have a wonderful evening.